We're going to start. Good evening, everybody. Last week there was no class, Wednesday night, but 2 weeks ago we were discussing, getting into the halachos of davening. So I explained first the concept of the ladder of davening going up and down, different stages of davening, different parts of davening. So now we'll get into the actual laws, a little bit of davening. I'm not going to go through all the laws of davening. But the main part of, when you get up in the morning, you have the brachas that we say in the morning, basically thanking Hashem for all the things that He gave us, that we're able to open up our eyes and move around and wear shoes and wear clothing, and we have the strength to go and do it. So all those brachas are mandatory, very important brachas that people shouldn't do anything before they say brachas. Okay, before you say brachas in the morning, it's called birchas shachar. The at 20-something brachas that we say, and the brachas before learning Torah. Those things really should be said as right after you get dressed and you wash your again properly, because those things they should be the first thing. You shouldn't eat before saying brachas. A person should basically do, that's the first thing. Ideally, people should daven right away in the morning. They shouldn't do everything else under the sun, and then when they finish everything else, then they go davening. Davening is a very important thing. Davening is we're asking Hashem for everything that we need. So again, the different parts of davening, not this week, but maybe next week we'll discuss what is the minimum requirement, especially for women, to daven. Now, women have an obligation, just like men. Men have an obligation to daven 3 times a day. Women, according to the Alter Rebbe, women have an obligation to daven shachris and mincha. That's what the Alter Rebbe holds. Women have to daven shachris and mincha. Now, there's a lot of halachic leeway. Women that are raising little kids and they're running, the kids are busy with the kids, you can't even daven straight. So then there's a lot of leniencies of things that you can leave out of the davening. But generally speaking, we're talking about a woman that doesn't have little kids in the house. A woman has an obligation to daven shachris and mincha. Might have not. They could. But shachris and mincha is an obligation. It's an argument. It's biblical, rabbinic. But bottom line is, women have to daven shachris and mincha. Now, generally speaking, when a person starts davening, especially, let's say, in Shachris, we start until Baruch Sha'amar, then you could talk. But once you start Baruch Sha'amar, especially in the middle when you say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Okel Averachman, from then until the end of Shemona Esrei, it's halachically forbidden to talk. You're not allowed to talk. No matter what, it could be in any language. You can't speak. People think you could speak in Hebrew. You can't speak in any language during davening. There's something I've seen people do, and it's something I would like to mention that it's not something that's appropriate to be done. You might be able to find a halachic loophole that in the middle of davening, people, they make their coffee before davening. In the middle of davening, let's say, a woman or a man's wearing towels and tefillin, and a woman's just davening. And they start drinking water in the middle of davening. They start drinking coffee or tea in the middle of davening. Can you technically find loopholes in halacha to be able to do that? Yeah, probably. But the bottom line is, you're in the middle of talking to God. What are you drinking coffee for? You want to drink the coffee before davening. Drink the coffee after davening. It's not that davening is taking you 10 hours. People shouldn't, once you start davening, people should not be eating or drinking in the middle of davening. It's just disrespectful. If you think about it, you're standing, could you imagine somebody, a Lubavitch would understand this better. You go into the Rebbe for a private audience, and in the middle of the audience, you're drinking coffee or tea or water. I mean, come on, it's a chutzpah. You just don't do that. You have to focus on what you're doing at the moment. When a person's standing at davening, the Gemara has an expression is kav de kamamada, like a slave in the presence of the master. So we're standing in the presence of Hashem. A person should try. I know the Yetzer Hara is very powerful then. But all the great ideas for the day, whether it's business or household things, always come in during davening. So obviously, it's not during. It's coming from kedusha. In the middle of business, you don't think about davening or learning. So obviously, it's not coming from anything holy. But generally speaking, people when they daven should not be drinking or eating or doing anything. You're supposed to focus on the davening. Now, ideally, a woman does not have this obligation. Man has an obligation to daven with a minyan. Davening with a minyan, we mentioned this briefly last time. Davening with a minyan means you daven shmona esrei with the minyan. That's the definition. It's tefillah b'tzibur. The women don't have that obligation to daven with a minyan, but men do. And again, davening with a minyan means, and therefore like we said briefly last week, that according to halachic, you come late to shul, you have to skip different parts of davening to be able to daven the Shemona Esrei, the Amida, as the Sfardim call it, with the minyan. In the Kabbalistic world, in the Chassidic world, we don't do it because there's a process like we learned 2 weeks ago. But still, the person is supposed to come on time to shul, supposed to start davening with the minyan. If the minyan is going faster, the Alter Rebbe says, it's brought down the Sefer Minhagim, it's fine as long as you started with the minyan and you're not talking and doing who knows what. You're davening with the minyan, you started with the minyan, even though you don't daven Shemona Esrei with the minyan, the Alter Rebbe says they're still called davening with the minyan. But again, a person shouldn't come late to shul. A person should focus on coming to shul on time. Davening is a very important thing, especially in the Hasidic world. It's known that when the Alter Rebbe was looking for a path in serving Hashem, he was told that there's 2 paths. In the city of Vilna, where the Vilna Gaon was, you learn how to learn. In the city of Mezrich, where the Maggid of Mezrich was, you learn how to daven. So the Alter Rebbe was debating where he should go. Should he go to Vilna, where they teach you how to learn, or should you go to Mezrich, where they teach you how to daven? So the Alter Rebbe said to himself, learning, I know a little bit. He was very big, going as a scholar at that time. And davening, I don't know anything about. The real meaning of davening, not just saying the words. So the Alter Rebbe went to Mezrich. Thank God he went to Mezrich. That's why we are all Chassidim today. Of the Alter Rebbe's founded the Chabad Chassidus. Because so davening in the Chassidic realm is a very important thing. Now we're not talking today about davening who knows how long, but we're talking focusing on davening. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes a very sharp letter that there should be no talking and davening from the first word of davening until the last amen of the last Kaddish. Even those parts that you would be allowed to daven, talk. The Rebbe said there should be no talking from the first word of davening until the last amen of the last Kaddish. And not only that, the Alter Rebbe says, I'm going to excommunicate people that talk willingly. And I'm going to send spies who are going to check out who's talking, who's not talking during davening. So davening is a very important thing. Now, in the real part of davening, so to speak, which begins in Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar is a very important tefillah. Alter Rebbe brings down in Shulchan Aruch, the text of Baruch She'amar was a letter that fell down from heaven in the days of Anshe Knesset Hagedolot, which were the men of the Great Assembly at the beginning of the second Bais Din. Actually, a letter fell down from heaven, and therefore it's a very, very important tefillah. And therefore we stand when we say Baruch She'amar, and the men hold the 2 front, or the boys that are not married and not wearing talis, and they'll hold the front 2 tzitzis together. The men will hold the front 2 tzitzis of the talis. Now, do you hold them in the right hand or do you hold them in the left hand? So it's interesting in Sefer Minhagim, it doesn't mean on a source, but it says you hold them in your left hand. Initially, the initial years, the Rebbe would hold the tzitzis in the left hand by Baruch She'amar, but in the later years, it's brought down already, people saw it, we saw it ourselves. In the later years, the Rebbe would hold the two tzitzis in the right hand, not in the left hand. So again, either way you hold it left hand, right hand, but the custom is to say Baruch Shem holding the first two tzitzis, and during from Baruch Shem Yishtabach, again, you're not allowed to talk, but certain things of Amen you say. You answer, generally speaking, all Amens. You answer Kedusha, you answer Baruch Hu, you answer Kaddish. You say Amen, you say the entire Kedusha. If they take out the Torah while you're in the middle of Sukkah de Zimra, you don't say Vahi ben Saya. You don't say Brich Shmei while you're in the middle of Sukkah de Zimra. That the Rebbe writes in Minhagim that we don't say. But and I'm not going to go into all the dinim. Now, another important din and davening, and people have to be aware of this because you see this and people are not careful with this. If a person touches any part of their body, which is normally covered, you're not allowed to daven unless you wash your hands. At least that hand that touched that part of the body. So what that means in the practical sense is, if somebody scratches their head in the middle of davening, they cannot continue davening until they go wash their hands. If there's no water around, they can rub it on a wall or a piece of wood or something like that. But you can't scratch your head during davening. You can't touch parts of the body above the elbow, parts of the body that are normally covered, which would include going inside your nose or inside the ear canal. If you touch those parts of davening, during davening, if you touch those parts of your body, you need to wash your hands. You could rub your clothes. The exception of that is if somebody's shoelaces come untied, and they tie their shoes. If you touch your shoes, you also have to wash your hands. So somebody in the middle of davening realizes their shoes untied and they tie their shoes, so they're touching the shoes, you have to wash your hands. Not only that, but even if you have non-leather shoes, like in Kippur, Tisha B'Av, and you touch them, the consensus of the poskim is you still have to wash your hands. So if you're davening and you scratch, you have an itch. So let's say you take your talis or your tichel and scratch your head. It's not a problem because you're not touching the actual scalp. Just touching the hair itself is not touching the scalp. But again, if you touch inside your nose, inside your ear, or you touch parts of the body which are normally covered, then you have to wash your hands before you continue davening. And the same thing, by the way, in order to make a bracha, if you scratch your head and you have to go make a bracha, you have to go wash your hands first. Anytime you daven and make a bracha, your hands have to be, pure, so to speak. Now, after Baruch Sha'amar, during the week, 6 days a week, we say the parak of Tehillim, chapter 100 of Tehillim, that's called Mizmor L'Seida. What is Mizmor L'Seida? Also, we stand by it. And it says in halacha, you should say it with simcha, with joy, because in the time of the Bais Din, they had a korban todah. A korban todah was a Thanksgiving offering. Today, it's like case that we bench gomel, for those types of things. In the time of the Bais Din, they would have to bring a korban todah together with breads of the korban todah. Now, if you notice in davening, we say Mizmor L'Seida during the week, but we don't say it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Why don't we say Mizmor L'Seida on Shabbos and Yom Tov? Very simple. We just explained that Mizmor L'Seida corresponds with this korban called the Thanksgiving korban. A person wakes up in the morning, they want to give Thanksgiving to Hashem. It's another interesting thing. The men would know this if you daven Chabad Nusach, that Friday night before Mincha, we say Hoidu and Pasach Aliyahu. Who instituted saying Hoidu before Mincha on Friday night? The Baal Shem Tov. It came from the Baal Shem Tov. Why did the Baal Shem Tov instituted that chapter 107, Haidul Hashem Kitayb, in before Friday night? The Baal Shem Tov said, a person lives through the week, they survive spiritually and physically, they need to say thank you to Hashem. That chapter of Tilim, Kuv Zayin, goes through all the people that have to bench Gaimel. And it says 4 times, the people going on the ocean, Yedol Hashem Chastei. In the place, people that are sick, Yedol Hashem Chastei. The prisoner, Yedol. So that chapter in Tilim talks about all the 4 different types of people that have to bench Goma. So the Baal Shem Tov said, we say that capital Tilim to thank Hashem that we survived the week. Mizmor L'Seida is thanksgiving to Hashem that we woke up in the morning and we're functioning. But why don't we say it on Shabbos? It's a nice thing. Why shouldn't we say it on Shabbos? Because the din was private sacrifices were not allowed to be brought on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Because private sacrifices were not allowed to be brought on Shabbos or Yom Tov, on Shabbos they were not allowed to ever bring a korban toda. Not Shabbos, not Yom Tov, because you're only allowed to desecrate Shabbos for korbanos, the ones that Hashem says, the communal korbanos that Hashem obligates us to bring on Shabbos. Personal sacrifices were not allowed to be brought on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So we don't say Mizmor L'Seida on Shabbos and Yom Tov. We don't say it Erev Yom Kippur either. Why don't we say it Erev Yom Kippur? Because when they brought the korban toda, like we say in Ezel Mekayman, the korban toda was eaten for a day and a night. Erev Yom Kippur, you can't eat it the following night because it's Yom Kippur. So therefore, if you don't have the whole time that the Torah allows you to eat it, you don't bring the korban. So Erev Yom Kippur, they did not bring a korban toda because the korban toda had to be eaten for a day and a night, and at night you can't eat the korban Pesach. I mean the korban toda because it's Yom Kippur. The same thing Erev Pesach we don't say it, and Chol Hamoed Pesach we don't say it. Why not? Again, for the same reason. The korban toda had to be brought with breads. They were called the lachmei toda, the breads of the korban toda that were chametz. You can't bring a korban toda on Pesach because part of the korban toda is the breads, and you can't bring chametz stick of breads on Pesach because it's Pesach. So therefore, those days of the year, Erev Pesach, Erev Yom Kippur, Yom Tov, Shabbos, we don't say it. Chol Hamoed, we say it because Chol Hamoed, they're allowed, except Pesach, they're allowed to bring a korban toda. So therefore, the custom is we stand when we say Mizmor L'Seida. Now, the most important tefillah, Mitzad Baruch Shem and Yishtabach, is like the bracha before, the bracha after, and Psukei de Zimra are the food in the middle, so to speak. The most important one is Ashrei, and then you have this Halukah Kavakoche, and then another Halukah that speaks about Menashemayim Maluba Mreim Halucha Malachav. That's also, there's really an order. I don't want to get into it now. There's an order in Shulchan Aruch. If you could only say some of them, which are the more important ones to say. There's an order in Shulchan Aruch. But generally speaking, if somebody can't daven the whole davening, they should call it off and ask them, what can they skip and what do they not, what they can do not skip. Okay, if somebody doesn't have a pair of tefillin, by the way, say they're in a situation, they're going to get tefillin later. You're allowed to daven shachris without tefillin. Shachris and tefillin are 2 different mitzvahs for men. I mean, women don't put on tefillin anyway. For men, davening is one mitzvah, tefillin is a separate mitzvah. We happen to do them together. But if you daven without tefillin, well, let's say somebody is in a scenario, situation, they can't put on tefillin. God forbid they're in a hospital. They can't wear not head tefillin, not the hand tefillin or the head tefillin. But they can daven. So you daven without tefillin. If you get later a pair of tefillin, you put it on, you say the Shema. You make a bracha, say the Shema, and that's it. You did the mitzvah of tefillin. So people sometimes they don't have a pair of tefillin yet. Some certain times they don't have, they're not able to daven yet. Okay, but the person ideally should not skip during davening. And I forgot to mention, when you finish Baruch Shema, you kiss the tzitzis. Okay, that is far as Sukkah de Zimmer goes in a general way. Now, a minyan, in order to say certain things, like Dvarim Shebekadusha, which are things of holiness, like you need to say Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu, repetition of the Shemona Esrei, Torah reading. For that, you need 10 male Jews over Bar Mitzvah. You need 10 male Jews because they're the ones that are obligated in that mitzvah per se, and therefore they are counted in a minyan. Now, where do we learn out? Stam, a very interesting thing. Where do we learn out that a minyan is 10 people? Where in Chumash or in Torah does it say that a minyan is 10 people? Interesting enough, the Gemara learns it out from the spies. Hashem said to Bais Rabbonim, the spies came back and everybody started screaming, we don't want to go in. So Hashem said to Bais Rabbonim, he bodlu mitecha edar zeis so maybe mixing up, whatever. The word Ada is mentioned in reference to the Meraglim. How many bad spies were there? 10. Because Yeshua and Kalev were not part of the Meraglim. They came back with positive stuff. So by the Meraglim, the Torah calls them an Ada, which means a community. Ayin Dalet Hey. So from there we learn out, the Gemara says, that a minyan is 10 people. So the question is, couldn't there be a better place to learn out a minyan from? We have to learn it out from something negative, from the spies. Why couldn't we learn it out from something positive? So the explanation is very simple. When a person davens, you're supposed to be like the spies. You're supposed to be like the Meraglim. Chassidus explains, what was the sin of the spies? They were tzaddikim. Rashi says, Kulam anoshim roshi b'nei Yisrael hema. Rashi says at that time they were all tzaddikim. They were righteous people. Why did they come back with negativity about Eretz Yisrael? So the Alter Rebbe look at the Torah explains very simple. They were holy people. They got mixed up a little bit. In the Midbar, what did the Meraglim say? We can't go into Eretz Yisrael. It's an area, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. It's a disaster. We want to stay in the desert. Why did they want to stay in the desert? In the desert, the Jews had the man from heaven. They had the well for food, for drinks. They had the clouds that cleaned the clothing, pressed them, cleaned them, made them grow with them. What did the Jews do in the Midbar? They sat and they learned and davened. That's what they did in the desert. They didn't have to worry about making a living. They didn't have to worry about anything. Everything was taken care of. So the Meraglim said, we're now going to go into Eretz Yisrael. There won't be any more man. There won't be any more well. There won't be any more clouds. What are we going to do? We're going to have to start working. So they said, it's Eretz Yecheles Yeshvel. It's a land that it consumes its inhabitants. We're going to be so consumed making a living, we're not going to be able to daven and learn like we did in the desert. So they really had a very good intention. What was their problem? That's not what Hashem wants. Hashem doesn't want you to stay in the midbar. Hashem wants you should go out into the world. So every day, really, and therefore the prerequisite for the Jews to go into Eretz Yisrael was the Jews staying in the desert for 40 years. That was the preparation for the Jews to be able to go into Eretz Yisrael and not to become consumed from the land itself. Every day we have the same thing. Before we go out into the world and take on the world, we daven. That is the preparation that when we go out into the world, We don't get consumed by the world. We keep our Yiddishkeit. Where do we get that strength from? From Davin Shachris. So therefore, when a person Davin Shachris, they're like the Miraglim. They're like in the desert. What does that mean? A person, when they daven, is supposed to not think about business, not think about the house, not think about anything. They're supposed to concentrate, like in the desert, they concentrated on learning and davening. So that's why we learn out a minyan from the spies, because the aspect of the spies was to stay in the desert to be able to concentrate on davening and learning. And that's why we learn out a minyan. Some people from that, because when we're davening, that's what you need to have. That attitude that it's all what Hashem wants us to do. But you need a minyan, and the minyan has to be in one place. Oh, it could read like a Tillim and substitute for the 13 attributes. You can always read Tillim, but you're not supposed to read Tillim in the middle of davening. In the middle of davening, even if you're ahead of the chazan, you don't read Tillim, where those parts of davening, you're not allowed to talk. Like, for instance, we mentioned before, you're not allowed to talk from Baruch Shama 3 Yishtabach. Therefore, you don't answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shmo, because that's talking. You're only allowed to say Baruch Hu Baruch Shmo in a place where you're allowed to talk. Davening in those places where you're not allowed to talk, you're not allowed to say Baruch Hu Baruch Shmo. To the extent, according to the Alter Rebbe, other poskim disagree. Some Sefer disagree. But according to the Alter Rebbe, if a guy was listening to Kiddush, to the bracha of Kiddush, to be yaitz of the bracha, and they said Baruch Hu Baruch Shmei, according to Alter Rebbe, it's very questionable if you were fulfilling the obligation of Kiddush, because he spoke. What did you say? Baruch Hu Baruch Shmei. Blessed is God's name. But you said it when you're not allowed to talk. So in Psukkah de Zimra, you're not allowed to say only Amen, Baruch Hu, Kedusha, things like that, but you're not allowed to actually answer, to talk Baruch Hu Shmei, and you're not allowed to talk anything else also. Another very interesting thing, which is brought down in Shulchan Aruch about minyan and davening, you're not allowed to count people. We know in the Torah, how did they count the Jews? They gave a half a shekel. They didn't count 1, 2, 3, 4. Why did they? Because it says when you count people, it's a whole discussion in the Farshim of the Chumash. Some say yes, some say no. But the bottom line is, when you count people 1, 2, 3, 4, it's not a bracha. It's ayin hara. It's a bunch of terrible things. So when you want to count a minyan, or you want to count how many people there are, so some people say not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. But in Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down various different ways of doing it. There are certain psukim that have 10 words in it. For instance, Hashia es amecho uvarech es nachlasecho ureim v'nasim ad olam. So you want to see if there's a minyan, you say Hashia es amecho uvarech es nachlasecho. Other people do another interesting pasuk. V'yiten l'cho elokim. So you have Yitan l'cho elokim mitala shemayim umishmane ha'aretz v'reiv dogan v'siresh. So the pasuk Yitan l'cho that we say Saturday night has 10 words. Some people use Yitan l'cho. It's brought down. These are all brought down in halacha. Other people say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam hameitzi lachem min ha'aretz. Also has 10 words. It depends. I guess what it means. If you like food, use the bracha meitzi lachem min ha'aretz. If you like brachas v'yitan l'cha, you say v'yitan l'cha. You know what I mean? Whatever. But these are all options in the post can bring down that you don't count Jews, for in any way whatsoever. Okay, we're gonna go to Tanya now.